I know I am sitting between you and lunch, so I'm going to make sure that I feed you a lot of information.
You used one of my biggest speaking starting pet peeves, which is I know I'm between you and lunch, but I'm glad you did because it inspired the topic of this podcast. And as soon as he got to that point, 10 seconds into the speech, I texted him like, why did you start that way? And then I heard the rest and I was like, okay, I get it. Taking a cliche like, how are you doing? Or I'm between you and lunch, and doing something clever and different draws people in. Welcome to Speak Arizona, the podcast for professionals ready to elevate their communication and leadership skills. Whether you're speaking to a crowd or leading a team, you'll get practical tips, expert insights, and inspiring stories. Join us as we dive into the craft of powerful communication and authentic leadership. Speak Arizona is powered by District 3 Toastmasters. Subscribe and take the next step to becoming the speaker and leader you want to be. Welcome to Speak Arizona, a podcast dedicated to empowering you to find your voice. Hi, I'm your host, Rupesh Prabhu. I help technical experts upgrade from being the smartest person in the room to the most influential, one conversation at a time. Now, this episode was inspired by a very good friend of mine opening his presentation with a very big pet peeve of mine. And this inspired a conversation between the two of us on how to not start your presentations, and hopefully we'll share some advice about what to do instead. Now, before I introduce our guest, I want to start with his presentation, and I'll let you decide, should he have done something different or did this work? Here we go.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's like I wrote it. How's everyone doing? Yeah, I know I am sitting between you and lunch, so I'm going to make sure that I feed you a lot of information. How does that sound?
With me today is past co-host of Speak Arizona, as well as public speaker and expert extraordinaire on burnout, Sherban. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome home.
Rupesh, it's awesome to be here just as a guest. I am happy to have this conversation and get into it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so sorry for putting you on the spot there. You used one of my biggest speaking starting pet peeves, which is I know I'm between you and lunch, but I'm glad you did because it inspired the topic of this podcast.
Yeah, I actually have about 10 different points, different examples on how not to start your speech or your presentation. And then I also have 3 simple ways, but very powerful on how to start a presentation. And we can dissect all 10 of them, plus I think you have a few, and just see where the conversation takes us.
Let's get into it. You know, I'm super passionate about this topic and how to start and really how to hook people into a speech. So I'm excited to hear it. Let's go.
Okay. Let's see. The first one, I'll share the number one way to not start your presentation is, hi, my name is Sherban. I am happy to be here. Have you ever done that?
I have done that, yes, in my earlier communication days.
Yeah, and it's one that we are just, I think most of these that we're going to share are just impulses that we have when we get on stage just to shake off the nerves. However, all of these are taken away from what you have to say. And I think you've mentioned this a few episodes ago when we were recording, is that the audience has about 7 seconds to make a decision. Am I going to give this person, the speaker, my attention, or am I going to think about lunch? Am I going to think about how my emails are piling on? Am I going to check out and just go on social media? And those 7 seconds are very important for us to draw the audience in instead of pushing them away. And some of these have that tendency, like hi, my name is, to push the audience away. Because in most cases, if you are doing a presentation, one, you might be already be introduced, so there's no need to have yourself introducing yourself again. Two, it may already be on the slide that you're sharing. And three, if you're in a close collaborative environment where you have just coworkers, they already know you, so that feels redundant and pointless. So please stop reintroducing yourself.
Yes, those first seconds matter more than anything else to get people's attention and get to know that you have something to say that's valuable. And if you go with these tropes, people turn off. And think about yourself when you were sitting in a presentation. And so that's helpful too.
We're ready with number 2.
Yes.
Have you ever said this? I am so nervous. Rupesh, have you done this?
I have not, because I've always felt more naturally on stage, but I've definitely seen other people do it. And the one message that I want to leave all speakers is 99.999% of the time that you're speaking, the whole audience and everyone wants you to be successful. So keep that in mind when you get up on stage.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even today, when I get on stages and I go to corporation or wherever I'm at, I still get nervous. However, the storm that's happening inside, it never shows the same way that you are on the outside. I'm having this picture of that duck on calm waters where it just feels like it's flowing nicely, where the legs underneath the water are just paddling. Nobody needs to know that you're nervous and you're thinking too hard, and you're thinking that people see your nervousness a lot more than you actually portray it. So the more you go up there and you don't say, I'm so nervous, the more you're going to calm down. So please do not start by signaling to your audience that you're not ready.
And I know this is not advice about starting a speech, but anytime you acknowledge an error, 95% of the time, your audience won't even know you made a mistake. So when you say, oops, I didn't mean to say that, or this bullet point came before that bullet point, the audience doesn't know. Roll with the punches. Don't draw awareness to your own mistakes. It's funny, I used to play an instrument when I was young, and children, their body language, they just live their heart outs on their sleeve. And when you make a mistake, you see it on their face, but the audience doesn't know. And it's the same thing with public speaking. So many new public speakers who are just starting to work on the craft, they will call themselves out. Oh, shoot, I said, I didn't mean to say that. And this is sort of similar. Don't call yourself out, because it puts that in your mind also. And instead, prime yourself with something positive. You go back and listen to our episode with Mark Brown and Darren LaCroix, they have those 4 questions to prepare yourself to be on stage. So I won't say them here. I'll encourage you to listen to that episode.
Nice. And I don't have this on this list, but now that you say it, because we're both from Toastmasters and we've seen a lot of new speakers speak, there is a tendency when someone gets on stage and they don't say, like you said, what they were intending to say, or they forget something, the automatic impulse, and I remember doing this many times, is to apologize. Like, oh, I'm sorry. You do not need to apologize. Just take a pause, breathe, and then collect your thoughts and move forward. And I'm going to double down on this one, Rupesh, because I've know Simon Sinek at one point, he was telling the story when he got on stage and forgot where he was at. And instead of being like, oh my God, I'm such a fool, or apologizing, he flipped it around and turned it into a very vulnerable moment where he said, have you ever had that nightmare where you find yourself on stage and you forget what you're having to say? And the audience, I think all of us had that in one way or another, nodded their head, and he's like, I have this right now. And he pointed out to someone in the audience, said, where was I? And the person in the audience kick-started where he was, and then he had smooth sailing. Everybody was so excited about his vulnerability, and he never apologized. So don't apologize, just roll with it.
I like it. Be vulnerable, but don't apologize.
Okay, we're moving on to number 3. All right, it goes like this. Can anybody hear me? Can anybody hear me? Or do you turn towards the slide or the monitor and it's like, do you see my slides? Can everybody see my slides? Again, all of these are more distractions than actual impactful things that you can say to draw the audience in. This takes away from your audience. And if you have slides or if you have a microphone, you should not do a microphone check when you get on stage with the audience. You should be there way beforehand, 15, 20. Some professional speakers come the day before and they should make sure that they do an audio check. So by the time they walk on stage, they already ready to go. They don't have to ask, can you all hear me or can you see my slides?
I always make friends with the AV team that does production behind the scenes. Every time I'm on stage, no matter how big, I've done 20, 30 person breakout room sessions. I've done 200, 300 auditorium style rooms. I always make friends with the AV folks because they're there to make me look great, and they have such challenging jobs. If you ever tried to do AV, you know it's challenging, especially at those more public speaking events. It's very difficult. Make friends with the AV, as Shaban said, get there early, test it out, because it's a lack of preparation. And of course, sometimes you don't have that opportunity to do it, but it's the same with Zoom calls. I mean, how many times have we heard, can you see my screen? And now there's so many different tools to see. Zoom gives you that feedback, or whatever meeting platform you're using, they give you feedback to see what's being shown. So learn how to use those things so you come off polished and prepared, because those are the things that make you stand out. So a little extra 15 minutes on the front end will give you that confidence that everything's working. And that will be one less thing on your mind when you're presenting, so you can really deliver the message you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, that's excellent point. And because we are part of Toastmasters, and I regularly try out my speeches at Toastmasters, and I see a lot of speeches. The club that I go to, they rely heavily on technology and sharing slides. And I got to tell you, even I struggled with it. And sometimes it connects, sometimes it doesn't connect, it displays, it doesn't, it disconnects, it turns off. There's all these headaches. However, I noticed that the people who are the most successful when it comes to connecting the technology are the ones who are there beforehand trying it out. So don't walk in the moment that you have to get on stage or do the presentation to check technology. Check it before.
What's the next one, Shaban?
Okay, number 4, and Rupesh might have alluded to this one. How's everyone doing today? Rupesh, what do you have to say about this one?
Well, I don't love questions that don't beg responses that you're going to then incorporate into your presentation. So it's just more filler, that you're just not adding anything to the conversation. You're making the audience do something, but you're not really engaging them. You're just interacting with them in a really superficial way. Yeah.
And when you have a large group, it is, what are you going to get? It's just going to get a muffle of, you're really not adding anything to it. And it may work when you're in a group of 5-10 people. That may work, especially if you're in person. However, when it's in a larger context, it doesn't work like that. Now, going back to how we opened this podcast is about my presentation at SHRM conference here in Arizona, where I said, I know I'm standing between you and lunch. And I always try to find a clever way of lightening the mood when I speak. So the reason why I started off with how's everyone doing is just to get them to understand that I'm starting to interact with them. And then I said that between them and lunch, but the punchline came afterwards where I said, I'm going to feed you a lot of information. So my need to say that I'm standing between you and lunch was necessary for the punchline so that I elicit some kind of laughter and humor from the audience so everybody relaxes and they know that we're not going to take the topic of burnout so seriously that we're not going to have a good time. So that's my explanation, Rupesh, but you may add to it or not.
I forgive you, Sherban. I forgive you. I remember watching, because we help each other. Sherban sent me this just to celebrate the moment of a public speaking event, and I was happy to provide feedback. And for those of you who know me, know I love to do that. And as soon as he got to that point, 10 seconds into the speech, I texted him like, why did you start that way? And then I heard the rest and I was like, okay, I get it. Taking a cliche like, how are you doing? Or I'm between you and lunch, and doing something clever and different draws people in. But don't just stop at the cliche, because it's a crutch and that's boring. But what you did was very clever and I approve. I enjoyed it.
All right, very good. Yeah, let's not just start how's everyone doing and then not add something additional to it. I agree. Okay, we go to number 5.
Let's do it.
All right. Let me start off by doing some housekeeping. I want to first off congratulate the AV group for being here. The event organizer, I thank you for having me here. If you get a survey at the end of the meeting, please fill it out. How does that feel?
I'm already checked out. Wait, what? Oh, we're on this podcast. I better pay attention.
Exactly. Yeah, when we start off our presentation, our speeches with non-logical explanations, unnecessary explanation, it takes away from your message. Let the housekeeping be done by either the person who's introducing you or beforehand or afterwards. Don't start off your speech because that just plummets your engagement and the audience just checks out.
That's right. And it's another crutch. I think people use these things to fill time, to warm themselves up, and it's not needed. Whenever I'm coaching other public speakers and when I speak for myself, I'm always looking for that hook, that thing to surprise people, to get them engaged, because people are so used to a rhythm of a conference or rhythm of an event where you're going to hear the same old, and they're already tuned out. So I always try to start with an interesting hook versus those more generic platitudes that really don't come off that authentically.
Fantastic. Totally agree. And then we move to number 6. I only have 10 minutes, so I'll have to rush through this presentation.
This one drives me crazy. This one, I lose it every time.
Yeah. There's many presentations that I had to scale back. So I have a 1-hour keynote where it's very well published. Sometimes the other speaker eats into your time, so you have to scale back to shrink your speech. Sometimes you don't get to speak for whatever, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 30 minutes. You have to shrink it down. It is not the audience's need to know that you have a lot of information and that you have to rush through it. Scale back your message in such a way that it fits the time. I've heard this many times that everybody will forgive you and appreciate if you end on time or early, but everybody will be mad at you if you go over time. So if you don't have the time that you want, make sure that you shrink it in such a way that you don't have to rush and you don't have to make these excuses.
Absolutely. In Toastmasters, we're very strict about timing and being on time. But in the real world, most of the time, things run behind. And the advice I would give is always have it in your mind. What are you going to cut out if you run out of time? And even taking a further step back, what is the single key idea you want to leave with people? If you should know that anyways, if you're prepared for your public speaking event, plan on it being a little shorter. But if not, what is the key message? So instead of saying, I don't have a lot of time, blah, 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 start with your key message. This is what I want you to walk away with. And I wouldn't even, well, you could say that, I guess. But that's the mindset flip, is go to the key point so the audience is like, this guy didn't speak for very long, but they have a lot to say and I'm interested.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. And it's funny because number 7 is very much in line with the number 6 that I only have 10 minutes. I didn't have enough time or too much time to prepare for this. This one also goes hand in hand with I'm so nervous, because it just signals to the audience that you are not considerate of them, that you're not giving them the value that they're there to receive from you. And saying that you didn't have much time to prepare just shows that you don't care. You never want to signal that to your audience.
Yeah. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes you were asked last minute. Sometimes you aren't. You don't have the time to prepare. But that doesn't mean you have to say that. It's just like apologizing.
That's right.
I think when it comes to public speaking, there's a piece of this that it is practice and polish and prepare. But there's also a very important piece of this that is impromptu, that's extemporaneous, that's reacting. And even if you have the most prepared speech, in fact, we had a public speaker today at Toastmasters who someone from the audience made a comment and they reacted to it in such a funny and fun way. It made the speech even better. So the reality is sometimes, especially if you're a leader or a manager, and we talk a lot about leadership on this podcast, you may not have time to fully prepare for whatever you're trying to do. But as Siobhan said, don't disrespect the audience and learn how to speak improvisationally, extemporaneously, off the cuff, because that's a really important skill, whether it's a prepared speech or not. It's a great way to engage.
I like that. Yeah. Practice beforehand. That always lowers your anxiety and makes it you more personable. I'm having a hard time with words today. And it just creates a different environment when you're spending some time preparing instead of just winging it. And if you are, be more mindful of what is your core message, like you said, Rupesh, and make sure that you at least deliver the core message properly. Number 8, starting off with a weak joke. And here, this happened to me where I was in the audience at an event and the person stepped onto the stage and she said, "Thank you for having me. I'm going to start my presentation with a joke." Like, already it's a red flag. And then
Just say the joke.
Right. And then the joke had nothing to do with her topic. She just had a joke with a somewhat okayish punchline, but it had nothing to do with her speech. It just threw me for a loop, and I bet you all the people in the audience, like, what does that joke have to do with anything? If you're trying to do a joke, make sure that it ties clearly into your topic, into what you have to say. And often I actually would stay away from jokes. I would say just use humor. Going back to the example, like I said, I'm stuck between you and lunch and I'm going to feed you a lot of information. It's something lighthearted, humorous. It's not a joke. It's just a quick punchline to get the humor going. Don't go in, it's like, I've prepared this joke for you that I'm going to read now. Please don't do that.
Yes. And unless you have the charisma and the person, I don't. Personally, I don't find myself very funny, but I know of people who can pull it off. But to your point earlier, the key message is, if you are making a joke or you do have a hook, make sure it relates somehow to what you're saying, because then it becomes so disjointed. And I was going to write a Leadership in the Wild article about this. maybe 5 or 6 months ago, but I didn't because I didn't want to disparage the conference person. But I went to a major tech conference and they had this opening with gymnasts and they were doing acrobatics and all these different things. And then after that, they went to the main speaker and the speaker didn't even reference it. It was just this like unrelated hook. And there were so many ways the speaker or the audience, as they planned the event, that they could have brought in the relevant of having this gymnastics, jumping around and the challenges, and they could have created a metaphor or a connection, and they didn't. And I was like, well, it was cool to have this gymnast like jump from the ceiling, but it had nothing to do with the rest of the conference, and they didn't even reference it. It was the most awkward opening ever, and you kind of lose people when, even if it was really cool, but It just connected to nothing. And it was almost like, did you put any thought into this? You obviously spent a lot of money on this thing, but applying that, I mean, not all of us are attending multi-thousand person conventions or planning them, but for your speech, it's the same thing. Make sure there's that through line, that connection. Otherwise you might start with a funny joke, but you're inadvertently losing people without even realizing it in your attempt to hook them.
Perfect setup, Rupesh, because number 9 is in the same neighborhood, where starting off either with a negative example or with something that confuses the audience. So I had this happen to me. I was doing a presentation and I talk about burnout. I was at a conference and I walk on stage and the first thing that I say is, "Who's ready to talk about burnout?" Excitedly. Nobody is. What are you doing? Someone came afterwards and gave me that piece of feedback, and then I looked at it at the recording and I'm like, why did I do that? It is so confusing. People are not excited about burnout. It's a topic that's very hard and very difficult for many people, and we can lighten the discussion about it, but coming on stage being excited about burnout, it's not a good recipe. It just throws the whole topic off. So don't confuse your audience. And again, another example that I had is one person came up and started asking a very convoluted question. Do you remember how a floppy disk works if you put it in, but we used to have the big floppy disk in the past, but now they're no longer even CDs, they're just memories, USB drives, but back in the day we had these floppy disks and you had to spend all this time. Do you remember those times? And everybody in the audience was like, what are we talking about? What are we doing? Look to be very short when you're looking to interact with the audience. Look to not create confusion, because confusion makes the people check out. And look to never start with a negative. How many of you are burned out in the audience? Show me your hands right now. Nobody wants to do that. The way I start my presentations are, has any of you known someone who has dealt with burnout? Because in that instance, they no longer have to admit that they're the ones, they just know someone. It's a lot more easier for people to come back and answer that question than who here is burnout? I want to see your hands.
That reminds me of a really important, and this may be in your list, but it's the who here questions. It's those audience engagement questions that you ask, who here. And it's very important, if you're going to ask these questions, get people to raise their hands, to then do something with that information. There's nothing more frustrating for me as I participate in different conferences. People ask questions and then they do nothing with that information. It's very superficial versus, oh, okay, 50%, 20%, whatever the question you're asking, make sure if you're going to ask the question and you're going to get feedback, that you're incorporating that into what you're going to say next, and you're adapting, and you're not just asking it as a throwaway superficial interaction and then moving on to something else, because that feels cheap to the audience. And sometimes people who aren't in the public speaking world as much, like Shaban, you and I, they won't know why they're disconnecting. They're not attuned to all these things. They just will be disconnected, and they won't even be able to say why. It's like, oh, it was a cheap interaction. But folks like us were like, oh, you're losing the audience here because you're just disjointed.
Yep, agreed. And we'll come back to that when we're talking about what to do instead of what not to do. Because I have number 10 is over-explaining your title or your background or your topic. Has this ever happened to you?
I personally have done this and over-explained all of those things. It was both because I wasn't as prepared for my elevator pitch or what my message was. Mainly that's what it was. Is I hadn't prepared effectively or what was the key idea or what was my elevator pitch, and then I just ended up rambling, and then you realize halfway through, oh, I'm just rambling.
There's a difference between, trying to just add a little too much context to whatever you're saying versus coming on stage. And this is why I wanted to jump in, is I remember the speaker came on stage and he was looking at his laptop and he's like, well, I did this speech this 2 weeks ago, but I had to change a few things, and I'm going to skip to the first 2 slides, but then I'm going to talk about this thing, and this is how I ended up here. Nobody needs to know that. You're just confusing the audience, over-explaining, or telling about your background. Like, people don't need to know that I've been a DJ in my life, and then I have a dog that I babysit every now and then I go to Costco and all of these things. Those are irrelevant to what you're trying to say. When you start your speech, make sure that you're succinct, you're drawing in your audience, don't over-explain, don't say too many things, just look to hook the people in.
One of my mentors in public speaking, he always said, and I think this is pretty common in the Toastmaster world, memorize the first 2 to 3 sentences of your opening and memorize the 2 to 3 sentences of your closing. As long as you have those in your head, you can kind of make it in between with your slides and your notes and your context, but come very prepared for the beginning. So you're not doing these things. Oh, last week I did this presentation. Sorry, this is Microsoft and now I'm at Google, or whatever the case may be. As long as you have that opening memorized and you have the confidence to deliver it and get over that initial nerves as you get started, even if there's a change that maybe you were or weren't expecting.
And it makes me think of, we're now all in a social media world, and how do some videos get millions of views or thousands or hundreds of thousands of views, and some do 300 that they seem almost the same. Well, it's those first 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds. It's that hook that brings the audience in instead of disengaging them and scrolling away. So this is what we have to do. We have to think about, what is it that I can say in such a way that the audience thinks, tell me more. So Rupesh, I have 3 ways of capturing your audience. I don't know if you have still some pet peeves left, or we're going to the...
I think you hit them all, I'm curious to hear what your advice on how to start a speech.
Okay. The first one, and mind you, this is always dependent, because when you're doing a 1-hour speech, you may have a higher chance of having a more lengthy hook versus if you're doing a 5-minute, 7-minute speech, you're doing a 3-minute elevator pitch. That's totally different. So it all depends on the context on how lengthy the hook is. However, one big way of capturing people's audiences is starting off with a compelling fact. And for example, my presentation is 66% of professionals report moderate to severe levels of burnout. That means more than half of us here have felt at one point or another the effects of burnout. You are not alone.
I really like that too, because I'm connecting to the question you said you like to ask at the beginning as well. You probably would have seen either more than 2/3 or the whole audience raise their hands about burnout, and then you're injecting this fact that they've just seen. So you're connecting the dots between the interaction you created with the audience and this fact, and those two together create that engagement.
Yeah, and I think people are more prone to listen to numbers, to where there's some factual data or some experiment or something that is tangible, that is proof, that really captures the audiences. So using a fact to me has been very useful in bringing that audience in and wanting to know more. We can go to number 2.
Yes.
Simple way of engaging the audience, and we've hinted at this plenty of time, is asking a question, and I'll add to it, that requires it's a simple question that elicits a yes answer. So my question, as I said before, is, do you know someone who's been tired or burnt out in the last 6 to 9 months? By a show of hands. And I can guarantee you, so far, more than half of the audience has lifted their hands up, because it's a yes type of question. And then my second question is, how many of you would like to have more energy, more joy, and more focus in your day-to-day? It's a very basic question. It's silly. It's a silly question. Of course, I want to, but it gets the audience engaged, and it makes them want to lean in and be like, yes, tell me more.
Yes, and I think there's studies, and I'm not an expert on this. I think this is more in the sales world of public speaking, which I guess when you're a public speaker, you're always selling. But getting people to say yes builds that connection. And my add on top is make sure all these things are relevant to what you're talking about. That works because that's the topic that you're known for and that's what you're speaking on. But I've definitely seen it where there's a disconnect, like getting the audience to say yes and then pivoting completely to something else. So make sure it's connected, make sure you're getting that engagement, not just superficial interaction with those questions.
It's the easiest and most simplest way to draw the audience in, by asking a question. Do you know someone? How many of you? It's very basic, but then the audience already pays attention because you're asking a question, and they want to know and want to see what everybody else is doing. So it is a sure in if you want to get your audience engaged. And of course, make sure that it's relevant to the topic, make sure that it's simple, and make sure that it solicits a yes answer. You don't want to ask, how many of you have had financial troubles? That's not going to work. Nobody wants to admit to that, even if they did.
I like it. Now,
number 3 is one that I think should be the most relevant, especially in Toastmasters, because we have 5 to 7 minutes to do a speech. It is very important to be succinct and get right to the point. And the way to capture an audience is by swooping in and starting with a story. Starting with a story that is captivating. Not, yesterday I went to lunch and I had some fries and potatoes. No, I like to start the story with I came to the United States with $200 in my pocket and a lot of drive and ambition to attain the American dream. That all of a sudden creates this curiosity as, oh wow, $200, what are you doing? Having a compelling story draws the audience in. It's kind of like starting a movie. It's just, they want to know what's happening, and it's another way to easy hook the audience in and want to know more about what you have to say.
And I would add, start in the action. As you said, it's easy when you're telling a story to provide all of this context, but sometimes it's better to start in the action. Maybe there's not the full story of that it makes sense, but starting with the action, that makes it really exciting. Think about what are the most important piece of this story and what's the most exciting piece, and start there. And that makes it a really good hook. Sometimes if you're telling a story, you need is it like your uncle at the holiday party telling this long meandering story? Start in the action. Make sure it's relevant to your topic, but stories are a great way. And I would say, especially in the professional world, people are afraid to use these personal stories and well, it's not professional. Well, this is a big tech conference. And I completely disagree. I strongly disagree with that. We've all been to all day conferences, meetings, presentations. And frankly, most of the time we're listening to people who aren't that great, or public speaking is not their thing. So when you're able to step out of that technical world and make an analogy or tell a story from your personal life that's related to your technical topic, whatever it may be, that is super engaging. And people are like, oh, I'm listening now because I can connect with it. And then I'm drawing analogies to maybe something that's more technical. And every time I've coached someone, they're like, oh, that's a little personal, or that's not related to this technical topic. And then they do it and it works so well. People understand what they're doing and understand their technical topic even better because they've been able to draw it to things that are parallel in their lives.
Yeah, that is beautifully said, Rupesh, because I do agree that oftentimes you may watch a speaker that you don't know and you're having a hard time connecting with them. And one of the things that helps us connect with the audience is by telling a compelling story about yourself. So I'll give you another example is when I talk about coming to America, I start off by saying this is not a Southern accent. Everybody catches the fact that I have an accent, and then I also humbly say that if I say something funny, know that English is my second language. So automatically it makes me more human, and when I say something off or I do something odd that it's not to the standards, people give me more grace because now they understand, okay, he's using his second language, he came from another country, look at him doing this on the stage, and the relatability and the connection is there.
Absolutely. And I've heard you say that before, but you said it this time and it made me laugh.
Okay, Rupesh, I want to share just 3 more things that anybody can do when it comes to stepping on stage. I've been stepping a few more times this year than ever, and I've taken these to heart just because they've helped me ground myself when I get on a large stage and I look at the audience and I get nervous. One of the best things, and it's kind of a given, but oftentimes we forget, we just rush onto the stage and want to get right into it. Just pause and take a breath. A professional speaker coached me before one of the presentation that I had to give, and he pulled me to the side of the room and said, look at the audience, just take a deep breath in and just know that you're wanting to share something with them that is meaningful. And the moment I did that breath and I looked at the audience, my shoulders sludged a little bit, I relaxed, and I was able to step on stage and just take a moment, ground myself, and relax before I ask my first question.
The power of the pause. I that's a trick I really like to use when I'm on stage, because you start there and you're quiet. I'm collecting myself, but the audience is also drawing like that little beat and break at the beginning. It's just like when you're whispering too. Often when you're in a big audience, big on stage, people like to go really loud and really energetic, but bringing it down depends on the audio system and the room and all those things. But the opposite of what you think you should do can also be really engaging, like just being quiet.
Very powerful. I agree. Yeah. These are it, Rupesh. These are the 10 pet peeves that we have, and then 3 things that you can do to, instead of opening your speech or communication with politeness, opening it with pure presence and grabbing people's attention.
I think the last thing I'll say is using these cliches. I know I'm between you and lunch. How are you doing? They lower your presence. They lower that executive presence and your value. And that's not what you want to do as a public speaker. So spend some time, think through these top 10. If there's more, we'd love to hear them and share them with us so we can add them to a further conversation. Sherban, I am so thankful for you to come back home to the podcast and share some of these tips and let me poke a little bit of fun at you for doing one of my pet peeves on stage, which is I'm between you and lunch. But Sherban, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about burnout, public speaking, all the things, how can they find you?
Go to my LinkedIn, Sherban Mare. just do a search on LinkedIn and they can find me there, or my website is sherbanmare.com. Would love to hear anybody's feedback, and if you're struggling with burnout, I'm here to help.
Well, thank you again, Sherban, for your time. And listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you want to hear more, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, we encourage you to speak Arizona.